Welcome to Royle Subjects, your go-to podcast for anyone trying to navigate the ever-changing world of real estate.
Come with us as we explore topics that are always relevant, never boring, and designed with you in mind. Welcome back to Royle Subjects. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Sarah.
And our funnier fact for you today is it love at first sight or is it love because you saw it first?
Ooh, great question.
And obviously we're talking in terms of real estate, but it does make me think about this whole phenomenon that's going wild on the Reels and TikTok. I sound so old with the way that I just phrased that.
With the reels and the TikTok.
Listen, I may post on social media, but I'm not top game. It's okay. I admit it.
on the internet.
On the interweb. No, but with Love is Blind, there is a woman in the show who is in love with two men. They're in love with her. And she has a date with one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And the one in the morning says that she's it for him and proposes. And she says yes. Then in the afternoon, she goes to have her date with this other gentleman and she breaks things off. And he says to her, I was going to propose to you as well. If I had gone first, would this situation be differently? Mm-hmm. And she can't answer.
Yeah.
It's very similar to what we're talking about now. It's that bias of, is it just because it was presented to me first and I thought through this opportunity fully? Or is it because I genuinely love it?
Well, to pull another pop culture reference, and true to my time, I think of The Bachelor, right? Because you think about that first night, that first rose that goes out, or the first date. You tell me that those people aren't the ones that make it all the way to the end, or almost, right? Not primarily because it's entirely scripted, but because those people make the impact at the beginning, and then that's what carries on throughout the rest of the show. It's actually known as anchoring, which is a cognitive bias that occurs when we see or interact with something initially. And it forces us to, not forces us, but it causes us to shape all of our perceptions and perspectives of everything that happens after that based on that first initial interaction. And so I think when we're talking about going and looking up different properties, talking about the first house that you see, did you really love it? Or did you just love it because it was the first one that you saw, and then everything that came after it was stacked up in comparison to that one, whether for better or worse?
Well, and, there's obviously some factors that contribute to that, right? So if you are our first-time home buyer or you're a current homeowner and you're looking to move, you usually don't start actually going and looking at properties until you find at least one that really stands out to you. And so just by default, the first one that you're reaching out to a realtor to go and see, or you're going to an open house, is probably something that you absolutely love and can see yourself in.
Yes.
Because you're not going to actively start searching until you find that.
Well, and I also think that when you're seeing a series of homes, we sometimes refer to this as a catalyst house. So you'll see a house that in some way will shape or change the perspective that you have of your entire home buying process, where all of a sudden you see something, you say, oh, I didn't think about that. Hold on a minute. We need to change our search criteria. We need to reevaluate. And it can be a different, there's different catalysts for everybody, right? Because we all have different priorities in our home buying process. But really important to understand that there's a lot of psychological aspects that come into play when we're in the home buying process. At the end of the day, we buy a house with money, not with feelings.
So it is a transaction.
It is a transaction. But that's not to say that those emotional motivators don't come into play. And we know that that's a huge part of our job is the emotional management. I mean, you talk about the therapy side of being a realtor, right? Because there's so much that goes into it that, yes, we can talk numbers all day long. But for a lot of people, and especially, more on the, when you're buying for your own personal home as opposed to the investor side of things, but when you're buying for your home, you're thinking of this is the place that you're going to be living. This is the place that, you might be raising kids, or you might be living with your folks, or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of emotional, which then lead to, or spur from those psychological factors that you have to keep in mind. You have to hold space for. You can't just ignore those things simply because of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, brings us back to, we've talked about it before, but having a meeting or set up like a conversation with your realtor before you go and start looking at houses. A lot of the times in the past, especially before this new legislation with TRESA was put into place, you would just meet your realtor at that first showing. So you don't have a chance to discuss your wants, your needs, your wishes versus your must-haves. And when you can have that conversation first, then the realtor is able to get to know you, get to know your wants, and cater your tour or home buying process or what properties you see to help mitigate that kind of love at first sight issue, right? But that's where, again, it's the relationship component really comes in, which ties into relationships, emotions, transactions, the psychology of buying and selling.
Yeah. I think the time that it takes to prepare and while you're looking at houses, right? Like we've all scrolled through realtor.ca and, trying to fall asleep at night, or maybe that's just me. But when you're looking at these properties, right, having those transparent conversations with, if you're in a relationship and you guys are buying the home together, I think that you guys have to sit down and have those open and honest conversations about what your priorities are in the home buying process. When we were planning our wedding, someone suggested to us, hey, sit down separately and write out the 3 most important things about your wedding day and then get together and read those lists. The things that line up, do those things. If they don't line up, either discuss it or rule them out entirely. Because if you're going to spend, weddings in comparison to homes, right? But if you're going to spend a good chunk of money, it better be on things that you both find as a priority. And it's really great to get those kind of conversations, not necessarily out of the way, but to figure out and to help to fine tune what it is that you're looking for. And it goes back to our conversations too about, the driveway chats, right? Once you're seeing those houses in person, things look different than they do on the internet, right? We can always agree with that. And so going and seeing some of these properties, having had those conversations, it starts to bring to life those priorities, because you can say, oh yeah, we really need a space for our dogs to run around in the backyard. And then you get there and you say, oh, this yard's a lot smaller than we thought it was, but it's fully fenced in. So, that actually might work for us. And that's the other value too, is when you're navigating what those priorities are and you're discussing them with your realtor, trusting our judgment in saying, hey, listen, I know that you don't love this, but let's just take a look at this because I think this other feature might be more important to you, right? And that, again, it just goes back to that honesty, that openness, the transparency, because it's our job to guide and serve you in this process, and to help you navigate the things that sometimes you might not even know, are the things that you want, right? This might be your first or second or third home. This is not our first or second or third time with a buyer. So that partnership really hinges on the openness, the honesty, the transparency.
Mm-hmm. And those driveway conversations of, at the end, was this a yes? Was it a no? Was it a maybe? And if it's a maybe, what were the pros and cons? And then you're able to move on with that clarity before you've seen multiple properties and everything kind of blurs together. And you're like, which house was what? Did I like that kitchen or that one? Obviously, there's photo proof. But just having a list is a big suggestion that I would make to anybody.
Yeah, I think this really applies to a lot of folks who have a short amount of time to make this kind of a decision. That's the other concern too, right? When we have a short amount of time to make a very important decision, sometimes that adds obviously a lot of added stress, pressure, emotion. And so it's really hard to keep a level head in that process. So I think it's really important to be able to have those clear conversations, give that quick feedback, and then move on. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to get caught up in seeing all those properties. And at the end of every house, you don't need to have, a 20-minute, 30-minute decompression session. It's quick. What's the feedback? Okay, great. Move on. And then at the end of the day, having that reevaluation, right? I think a lot of times too, for our military clients, this is the kind of situation that they're facing. And so we tailor our process a little bit differently to be able to bring out the details of what's most important to them as quickly and efficiently as possible, because the whole process needs to be pretty quick and efficient. But the same can apply for anybody, right? You want to be able to make the right choice and not feel stressed or pressured into it. And with spring market pretty much upon us, I think that this is an important conversation to be having.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I totally agree.
You might be asking yourself, so what's the solution, right? We've talked about how there's a lot of emotion and a lot of psychological factors that go into the purchasing experience. So what do you do? And I think it kind of comes down to 2 things. Either you pace yourself or you just kind of grin and bear it and you go for it.
Mm-hmm. And that comes down to you, right?
Yes,
you have to
absolutely.
know yourself. Am I the type of person who overthinks things and needs to have a logical list and then just make a decision? Because if I don't, I won't make one.
Yep.
Or am I the type of person who is very logical and needs time to actually weigh it all out and then make a decision?
Yeah.
Knowing yourself and having that conversation with your realtor so that sometimes with properties you don't have time.
Yep.
And so you need to be quicker with it, but then having that confidence to double check your work or your thoughts with someone who you trust.
But it's funny because you can think that you've got all these systems in place where, you might be more methodical, you might be more detail oriented, taking a little bit more of a pace as opposed to the fly by the seat of your pants approach and just kind of go and get it done and see what happens. But going back to that catalyst concept, there are things that can change the game for everybody. Going into it with an open mind, I think, is probably the biggest piece, because you have to know that it's going to pull things out of you that you might not have expected, and you just have to be okay with it, right? I think of, in The Notebook when he's like, what do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. Like,
it actually is.
It is. Like, it's not. We get it, right? Like, when you're looking at a house, it's okay if you don't know what you want right away. It's okay if you don't have the warm and fuzzy feelings when you walk through the door. But in the end, they made a decision. Lovely love story. Hope you find the Noah to your alley when it comes to houses.
So we've said it before and we'll say it again. We're here for both the transactional and the emotional side of buying and selling because both are important and both have their place.
Yeah. They go hand in hand, as do we with our buyers.
I'm Danielle.
And I'm Sarah.
And we can't wait to talk to you next week. If you have any questions regarding real estate, please feel free to reach out at our website, theroylegroup.ca, or The Royle Group on any social media platforms.
See you around.